We're going to move to the QA panel right now. So please, anybody who wants to add on, because we're talking about the same identity access management space, I will have questions from for every single vendor. But if you want to comment, if you want to add up on some of the questions I'm asking, please feel free. Feel free to jump on. Rajan, one question that I wanted to ask you, listening to your conversations, you mentioned indeed in this COVID environment, the growing amount of everybody working from home and connecting with their own device, not only corporate device. I guess one of the challenge, how do you ensure, you know, the challenge, the conflict between security and applying security to a personal device and data privacy concerns, and to make sure that on the same device, personal data are not accessed, processed by even your employer where it's not allowed?
So there are, good question, Anthony. So when you have your personal devices, bring your own device is very, very common. There are solutions out there where, for example, we have implemented and deployed a solution with an MDM vendor who can actually differentiate between the workspace and applications that the work has control over and where my personal data is. So definitely that is one way to differentiate this as your personal applications. They're not going to look into or delete your banking applications or snoop into what data is being transferred, etc. So you have your own kind of workspace area. That's one aspect of it. Another aspect is from perspective of you as an employee, or sorry, you as an employer want to make sure that any device that is coming in has not been infected with malware, with has not been used into other attack mechanisms, etc. So there are technologies out there like device reputation, which we provide, and you can actually deploy it, whether it's a mobile device as part of an SDK embedded within the applications, or if you're accessing browser-based applications, then there is SDKs embedded there, which can provide certain fingerprint of the device to our backend, which is collecting data of about 6 billion devices worldwide to tell you what's the reputation of the device. Very simple test can be run on the device itself, saying whether it's jailbroken, rooted, etc. But then there's a larger network of signals from those devices, which we gather worldwide and say, and it's not about the user specifically, but about the device, whether that device is engaged in certain nefarious activities.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for that. I will switch back. So if anybody wants to comment on the questions, again, feel free. From other vendors, I want to switch back, so we'll go around in different questions, but to the privileged access management space with Sena Segura, and questions for you, Marcus. On the privileged access management, so your presentation was great, and not only on the solutions, but also the methodology, the approach to bringing a PAM solution. I guess one of the questions we hear very often is, you go to systems, take Active Directory. Everybody has Active Directory, whether it's on-prem or the like of an Azure AD. You've got hundreds, thousands of accounts. How do you differentiate a privileged account to a normal account? And some are obvious if you are a domain administrator, fair enough, but there are probably a lot of different accounts in the middle. How do you solve that? What's the recommendations that you would have for that?
Okay, that's a good question. And usually when you go to the Active Directory, you have a lot of accounts, and you can classify based on the number of privilege it has. So it's very common to understand what kind of privilege, if this credential has a privilege to address any configuration in the hardware and in the desktop, it will be considered as a privileged account. If its credential has a privilege to create users, so depends on the pulse of that's up that credential, we will target it as a privileged credential. And then we create and identify it to create a way to change this password, to change this credential very fast. So in order to not be exposed. So based on the number of privilege it has, we can identify if it's a privileged credential or not. And we had talked to customers at the beginning of the process to identify which rules we can set up together to correctly identify it.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thanks for clarifying this. Another point I wanted to ask you, and you mentioned that briefly in the presentation, which is so true, we see it every single time, is the pushback you get when you want to deploy a PAM solution from, the traditional IT administrator who for the last 10 years had 24/7 access to the systems and privileged access. And then you're telling him, well, tomorrow you can't do that anymore. You will have to use the PAM solutions to make sure that we know what you're doing, and if there is problems that we can actually assess what happened. What we see very often is the pushback where those community of users sometimes will say, oh my God, I won't be able to work anymore. This is the end. No, I can't. And yet you get pushback from the operations. I guess you've seen that more than once. What's your recommendations with these kind of situations, and how do you approach it?
Yes, that's really interesting questions. We have learned a lot about that from when we start to deploy PAM. And that's really one of the main issues we have when you're deploying PAM. And I think the first important thing here is that we're seeing a shift in cybersecurity mindset. So with all these new regulations, one thing we should consider is that the administrative employees, they are being held as responsible for actions. So the first thing to understand that we are changing, we see a change in the regulation that is making the guys responsible for action. So when you start to talk about understanding the responsibility for each action, we see there's a change in the mindset, right? That's the first point. So they are becoming aware of the responsibility to have an access. That's the first point. The second point is that if you bring your team from the beginning, understand and share the business drivers, the business motivations to that deployment, it becomes much easier to they understand why you were doing that. So it's much, we believe that when you start from the beginning, sharing the proposal, the intention behind this project, make much easier to do that. And the third point I would like to consider that is I have mentioned in my presentation that it's very important at the beginning, you understand where you're going to have a friction. Because you see a lot of administrators today, they believe that this change, mindset changing, they believe it's going to be good for the company, for they, is make their life much safer, let's say like that. So when you identify the correct friction points or the persons that have this kind of restriction, you can have clear talks about that, and makes much easier for the deployment of the process. So we have seen less than 10 to 15% of the user with restriction resist to a good talk, to a clear objective doing that. So at the end of the process, if you have with this 10 to 15% of users that really keep pushing back, you need to use a stronger push with the corporate definition. But almost all the time we see that the administrators are understanding the relevance of doing that and cooperating with the process.
Okay, thank you very much. It's very useful. Thank you. I'll move questions before we enlarge to for everybody general questions. Questions for Binod at Ilantus. Thank you, Marcus. Binod, on your presentations, I wanted to ask you, is there common triggers or common context that you recognize for organizations to unify identity access management under the same fabric as you were mentioning during your presentations? Is there something that says, oh, yes, for us that clicks, that makes complete sense, or is it really specific from one customer to another? Oh, you're on mute, Peanut. Sorry.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you loud and clear. Thank you.
So that's an interesting question. And for getting an answer to that, we need to really look at what are the common client markets in question. You have large enterprise customers, typically global organizations, more than 25, 30,000 users minimum, working in all continents, quite a complex scenario. Whether we like it or not, they have already invested in some sort of technology, and they're like Titanic ships, which you'll find very difficult to turn around, even though they have realized that what they have got perhaps is not serving their purpose so well. In contrast, if you look at the mid-market, typically customers with up to about 10,000 users, there's no hard and fast rule, but about 80% of the customers we find in that band. And revenue, according to Gartner, about $3.5 billion a year. Those are the customers which typically classify for the mid-market, and a good number of them have not yet implemented identity and access management. Some of them have gone and done something with cloud-based access management, but IGA is something that either they have not implemented, or many of them we find have bought something, either remained on the shelf, or really partly got implemented because they got disillusioned with the costs and the effort that is really required to put it all together. Those are ideal situations for the comprehensive compact identity kind of a technology, because look at a bank, for example. We're working with very large number of mid-sized banks, and because of the regulations, because of the nature of business they're in, some of them would like to begin with something like access certification. Simple, but very, very important thing to many organizations. Some would like to begin somewhere in the access management side, looking at just the AD-based integrations, applications or something of that sort. And some would like to begin with provisioning of the most key applications. So they could be coming in from different directions, but one common denominator is that they do not want complexity of. They have been watching from the sidelines the complexity of identity and access management. They're not wanting to invest that kind of money, nor wait for that long to implement these technologies. And they would like services to be on the fly rather than long-range implementations. So those are ideal customers, typically from the mid-market, who have implemented maybe access management. Many of them have changed to our technology because in access management, they felt that they're serving only one small purpose, and that also could be far more expensive. So these mid-market customers are not only looking for comprehensive solutions, but also for low-cost economics and quick implementability, and something that could be coming closer to identity fabric concept that I talked about. That's the right kind of customers.
Thank you, Vinod. Thank you very much. Much appreciated. And then one questions for Matt at ForgeRock. So something I wanted to pick on. You said in your presentation, Matt, you talk about complete IAM platforms. I know that you've released recently also in the governance space with ForgeRock governance platform. So what I wanted to ask is how ForgeRock is expanding its wings in this area as well, and what's the objective with this jump into the governance space from ForgeRock?
Yeah, so I really appreciate that, and yeah, it's very true that ForgeRock has been known as a SIAM identity and access management provider. We've had a lot of leadership recognition from different analysts in that space, but over the past 2 years, we've looked at the entire market and the entire range of what you need to provide as identity and access management. And you're correct, we started moving into the governance space about 1.5 years ago with The first part of that was an access request solution to prevent unauthorized access. And then we moved to an access certification solution to be able to remediate and detect unauthorized access. And where you see us going now, and we just released our first product here, is really leveraging artificial intelligence to drive the identity governance process, to automate it, to make it more secure, and to make it not as cumbersome as it has been in the past. As Benoit's pointed out, you know, a lot of customers have gotten started down the governance path and have got disillusioned at how big and complex of a problem it is, how many accounts are overprivileged or have too many access entitlements, and how do you get your arms around that? So we have another strategy here at ForgeRock, which is really leveraging our artificial intelligence. And as being a provider that provides access management as well as identity governance, we're going to leverage that artificial intelligence to be able to see both sides. And if you think of it like a brain, you have the left side of the brain, which is very analytical, and the right side of the brain, which is very creative. And so on the left side of the brain, we're going to drive your identity governance solution through AI. And what we're going to do is we're going to leverage a lot of different sets of information. So application logs, Active Directory, an identity governance solution, our own single sign-on solution, to see what the real-time access is across your organization, right? So, you know, roles are going to change. Peer groups can be very biased because as soon as one person gets access in a group, that lowers the risk for the next person, So we want to eliminate all that with our artificial intelligence and be able to automate access approvals, access denials, send only the ones that are in the middle for employee review, and do the same thing with access certifications. Then on the other side of that, since we have that information of who should have access to what, we want to be very good at providing really good identity hygiene and only giving people access to the things they need. On the access side of that, then what we want to do is we want to make sure, okay, so Matt's allowed to have access to this entitlement right now, overall, but is he allowed to have it right now? And, you know, Rajan talked about zero trust and how, you know, once you authenticate somebody, the basic principle of once you authenticate somebody, you have the most trust that that's them at that given moment. But we want to leverage the other side of artificial intelligence to say, is that still Matt there? So, you know, I've logged in, and Rajan gave the example. I log in, you know, he checks his email, he goes to Salesforce, he does this, he does that. Well, as you build that confidence level, I can actually have more confidence that somebody's the person who logged in an hour later by using artificial intelligence to look at that behavioral analytics. And this is where we feel at ForgeRock, where you say, where are we going down the line, is we want to be that unified provider leveraging artificial intelligence to be able to look at, should you have access to something, yes or no, and should you have access to that at that given moment, to provide that total 360-degree view experience of a customer. So that's where we're headed, definitely progressing down the identity governance side and using AI to be the driver in that, using AI to be the decision maker, the policy maker, and to set those different risk levels of who should have access to what and different entitlements.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate it. Very good. Thank you. What I'll do now, because we have literally a few minutes left, so let's open up to everybody who wants to pick up on the questions, and feel free. So it's really questions for anybody, any speakers, as you see fit. So the first questions I wanted to ask all of you, we see the emergence of CIAM. So CIAM as consumer or customer identity and access management, which is switching from the traditional identity access management or governance as a security space. And I wanted to get your opinion on how fast are we switching and growing the ability to add business value and justify the return on investment, rather than the typical security projects, which is very difficult to tie to the core business of a bank or financial services, for example. Do you see that? Obviously, you all mentioned COVID and how this has fast-tracked digital transformations, but do you see that following up on the same trend as fast as we've seen over the last couple of months?
So I'll jump in on that one. So I think what we're seeing, and COVID's accelerated it, it was already going to happen, but I think the time horizon has gotten a lot shorter. When you look at e-commerce, people want to have a personalized experience. They're more likely to shop at organizations that give them recommendations. So they want this personalized experience. They want organizations to know who they are. They want that small mom and pop business type of experience, but they want it online. Now, with that, they also want security, or actually, it's not that they want security. Security is actually expected. So they expect that their account's going to be secure. You're going to protect their data. You're going to do all these things. So when we look at it at ForgeRock, it's all about how do you provide organizations the ability to provide their customers the best experience. And we do that through our contextualized journeys, where we're able to adapt what we're doing based on the different context. You know, Rajan talked about context. Everybody here has talked about how context interacts. So I do believe that organizations that are able to provide the best security experience, the best self-service identity onboarding experience, and then be able to gather that critical information through progressive profiling of a person and provide recommendations, are really have a chance to supersede some of the big businesses that you know from on-prem. So with this rapid shift, if you're able to provide the best digital experience, you can start taking business away from some of your competitors that might have had a better brick and mortar experience. So I think really SIAM is going to be really critical now and over the next couple of years, as e-commerce is going to have a big boost from the lockdowns that we've had.
Thank you, Matt.
So Anthony, one more thing. Thanks, Matt. That was excellent. Well put there. SIAM is going through a tremendous shift also, because the focus has moved on to online, more and more e-commerce, more and more frauds, PSD2 compliances in Europe coming through. You will see 3DS kind of transaction verification, strong consumer authentication. All these things keep on were happening before COVID was there also, but just the acceleration of that thing has put things in a different perspective. Remote onboarding of customers and consumers for whether the banks, etc. That's where we are seeing a huge shift and uptick. People want to get different signals. Fraud detection and prevention is becoming key and center also. So people are not just looking for an identity store; they're looking for advanced signals, deeper AI, machine learning algorithms to provide them with the overall view of how a customer is interacting with the systems, even behavioral biometrics, the way you type, the way you switch between applications. So that's where things are headed, I think.
And Anthony, when we talk about SIAM in the mid-market, it is even more, we are seeing a lot more interest for SIAM and the importance of it than even larger organizations. But they, if you look at Gartner's documents, they very clearly talk in terms of the must features in SIAM and the optional features. And what everybody is trying to do in the marketplace is to build a huge SIAM, like we built a huge IGA at some point in time. From our point of view, what we see talking to large number of mid-market customers is that many of them, almost 40% of them would like to have SIAM features from inside the same product, but the basics. They don't want to complicate life too much. A complex product with too many features and things is also more difficult to implement and is confusing. And of course, it costs more. So while we look at the immediate implications and importance of implementing SIAM in the mid-market, it's also important to see what is it that market needs and how quickly that can be deployed and how it can work in an interconnected fashion with the rest of the identity and access management. That's extremely important. And we are going to have our SIAM early next year, which is also going to be a part of compact identity, like we have everything for the workforce.
So thank you, Binod, very much appreciated and great answer. We are running to the end. So just as a conclusions, I think we do see across the IAM space, we had a very great set of presentations today. We do see from the cloud, the emergence of all the different digital transformations aligned with regulations growing in GDPR, especially with, for example, at the moment, the UK leaving the EU. So vendors, all of you with the SaaS solutions coming up, take into account this kind of challenges, having to provide the data, host the data, process the data, ensure the data is controlled in the right way to comply with this data privacy as well. So it was great to have you all around, and thank you very much. If anybody has further questions, you can reach out to us. We will make sure we facilitate the conversations or reach out to those vendors directly. Thank you very much. I hope you really enjoyed those conversations. I'm sure we could have continued for a lot of hours, but we need to leave the space to the next conference. So I will liberate the room. And again, have a great day, and thank you for this contribution. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Appreciate it.